What are signs of a dumb person? Story 1. Consistently failing to grasp basic logic, refusing to consider new information, or making the same poor decisions repeatedly despite evidence. Reply 1. I would take a slight issue with the poor decision one. For example, addicts show that poor decisions are not always due to a lack of intelligence, but other mental and physical conditions. Reply 2. Yeah, as an addict in recovery, I knew I was making a bad choice. Did it anyway. When you're depressed AF and feel like life doesn't matter, you tend to make poor choices. And intelligent people actually tend to suffer from depression more from what I've read because you tend to think a lot more and overthink things. Ignorance really can be bliss. Reply 3. I am not unintelligent, but I am absolutely terrible at making good life choices. I find myself unable to learn from my mistakes. I piss myself off so much at how I can regret something, eating a whole pizza. And yet the next day, only the positive parts of eating the pizza come to me, and it's like the regret aspect is not present in my mind. It feels like I have blinkers on. I have tried meditating on the awful feelings of regret to make them more likely to spring into my mind when the urge arises, which kind of works, but it's an uphill battle and easy to fall off that wagon. So much self-hatred comes from my inability to not repeat mistakes. Reply 4. Well, patterns are hard to break, and punishment is not a very effective tool. When trying to make hard changes, I've started to think of myself as a child learning to walk. I will fall. Parents don't yell at their children for falling, but make sure they are okay. Encourage them to get up and keep walking. So my inner voice takes the role of the parent. If you keep encouraging yourself to try and make the right decisions, it will get easier over time. If you keep yelling at yourself, the chances are you'll conclude you're a failure anyways, so you might as well just give in to your urges. Story 2. They don't want to understand or learn. Reply 1. Yes. This was what I wanted to say, but I didn't have the phrasing. You'll have a conversation with these people, and they'll make some obviously ridiculous and illogical claims, so you gently push back with relevant information. As adults do, this is how we chat. Most people will go, I didn't know that. Maybe I've gotten things mixed up somewhere. Start Googling, and this is how we live and learn. But some people, the idiots of the world, will say, no, I'm pretty sure it's true. My cousin told me, and stick to this easily disprovable belief of theirs while also making no effort to even verify their own correctness or seek the answers to check if they are, in fact, mistaken. It's a modern form of madness. Learning anything gives me such pure joy. I cannot understand continuing about your life with this unknown little nugget of information and a question mark above it, and a person not feeling that burning irritation of needing to know. Side note, my psych lady says learning and discovery, and how that tickles our brain, is chemically perfect for counteracting depression, and it's totally okay for me to be reading about large ships and composting at 3 a.m. Note for the rest of the 3 a.m. encyclopedia readers. So we're allowed to do our deep dives on our little niche interests, but we gotta regulate our escapism. Apparently, this is what I'm told by psych lady. Reading about anglerfish instead of doing your work at work because you're too burned out to face your to-do list? Not okay. That's your canary in a mine warning sign to fix things. Reading about the Aral Sea in a bath at 1 a.m. as your way to feel like you're in a happy little bubble? Totally okay if it's not interfering with waking up for work tomorrow? I like sea things, obviously. If you simply can't regulate yourself on how much time you spend escaping to your happy place, because you're just under too much pressure to be present in real life, that's a sign things aren't okay up in that tangled little ball of string you call your mind. Reply 2. Yes, or they think that questioning authority or experts is as far as you should take that thought process. Should we ask questions? Of course. But then you have to seek answers while using critical thinking. I work in a special needs school and got into a very public fight with a colleague over vaccines and autism. Her thing was, well, as a parent, you have to question if they're safe. My retort is that yes, you have that responsibility to your children, but that the question has been unequivocally answered by decades of actual research, not YouTube, Facebook research, and to ignore all that actual data is plain idiotic, not to mention irresponsible for people in our line of work. Reply 3. They assume that they're done learning. They know everything they need to survive, and therefore, new information is invasive and doesn't compute. These are the people who are holding humankind back from progressing. We are catering to the lowest common denominator, and I, for one, am tired of it. I love hearing these idiots stand in defiance of simple things like vaccines. I just feel awful for their poor children who have to suffer. But if that's what it takes to clear out the population that's holding us back, so be it. Can we focus on moving forward and becoming a little less embarrassed to be the dominant species on our planet? Reply 4. My neighbor has a Trump flag hanging outside that he's super proud of despite living in the Bay Area. The other day he told me he was moving to Idaho. So I asked why and he said because of the idiot policies here in California. Then he started getting himself worked up, brought up that he was called a racist, and everyone else is afraid to have a flag like that. So I asked, do you think that flag has become divisive? Guy freaking lost his mind and left my garage. So now he's going to live with like-minded people. Reply 5. Someone recently claimed that our employer was putting cat litter boxes in one of the bathrooms for people who identified as cats. I'd heard the argument that some school in the U.S. quote was doing it, which is also nonsense, but at least harder to disprove nonsense on account of having to check literally every school bathroom in the U.S. But the bathroom they claimed had a cat litter box and it was like a 5-minute walk away. I decided to call them and say, let's go take a look. They absolutely refused, and I heard them still making the claim the next day. Reply 6. I wrote this under another comment, but I think with most people it's not so much about not wanting to learn, it's often an emotional unwillingness to admit you don't know something. After all, in order to learn something, you need to not know it to begin with. Many stupid people have a deep fear and avoidance of ever admitting they don't know something, which basically guarantees they won't learn. They misunderstand smart people as people who are just always right. Just like Donald Trump is a poor person's image of a rich person, most stupid people are behaving the way they think smart people behave, whom they assume knows things all the time, when, in point of fact, most of the smart people are the most ready to admit things they don't know or aren't sure of. Story 3. Inability to see a problem or scenario from another person's point of view. They don't have to agree with the other person, but they should be able to understand an alternate perspective. Reply 1. To me, this is much more a sign of an asshole. I've worked with some surgeons who have blindingly fast, impeccably accurate verbal and spatial reasoning, as well as seemingly endless reserves of working memory, and who basically cannot countenance the existence of perspectives other than their own. Insofar as there are different kinds of intelligence, I guess you could say these guys lack emotional intelligence, but honestly, I think they are smart people who are just kind of a-holes. Reply 2. I see a ton of that on Reddit. People are quick to say this about people with opposing views, but when it comes to their side, there's zero awareness and accountability. Just pure intellectual dishonesty. I see it everywhere, but on Reddit specifically, there's just so much unearned self-righteousness behind it. It's worse on Twitter, but it's Twitter. It's like saying, this place stinks, but the sewer under the rotten eggs factory stinks more. Reply 3. People with ADHD sometimes just are blind to that in some situations, myself included. People who know me just remind me that there are other alternatives to see. I find it a tremendous help, but I can see where it's easy to be a jackass in those cases. AKA, it's not always intentional. Reply 4. That's an autism thing, just in case you haven't been checked. Around 50% of people with ADHD have it. ADHD causes more behavioral things. Interrupting or butting into conversations, talking fast, changing topics at random, spacing out and ignoring the person on accident, talking a lot. Unless someone explains their POV to me, I won't get it. I have to force myself in their shoes, frequently, to avoid coming off like an asshole. My brain assumes people will just tell me things if they are upset or unhappy or want me to know. I was diagnosed by a psychologist at 24 as having high masking and low support needs autism. I am not a medical professional. I do recommend getting checked with a professional if you are able to afford it, as quality of life improves with coping skills. Story 4. A lack of curiosity. Reply 1. Provided all other things are equal. When I was suffering from a moderate depressive episode, my curiosity went out the window. I was just flat and not interested. My job is R&D and rare disease treatment, so curiosity is a necessity. So I am normally curious to an almost irritating extent, except when depressed. Reply 2. Curiosity gets taught out of us many times. Like at work, it's fun to see and learn how to do some stuff from the professionals, but it's going to backfire on us when we get fooled into then adding one more responsibility when we already have our plates full. Reply 3. I knew a girl back in high school and in my early 20s who I really liked, but she was dumb. However, she was so sweet, positive, and I think knew that she struggled to understand things, and it just made her a really enjoyable person to hang out with. She single-handedly made me rethink how I was devaluing people based on low intellect. The relevance here, though, is that she was intensely curious. Because it was difficult for her to understand how things worked, everything was amazing to her and she wanted to know more. Despite it being harder for her to understand or learn things, she still did it all the time and with great joy. Because of her, I don't think of a lack of curiosity as a sign of low intelligence, but instead more as ego mixed with cynicism. I am sure some of these people who aren't curious, even aggressively so, are technically not dumb. I am also sure that my old friend is probably less ignorant than many of those people, even if they would be considered smarter than her in a lot of ways. Reply 4. I do not think it is only a lack of curiosity. I have an incredibly curious friend who cannot grasp any information. It's like she eagerly pursues something out of curiosity, but never truly understands what it is. We've reached a point where I refuse to help her anymore because she never grasps the essence of the topics. For example, I once had to explain gender discrimination is and how job applications work because she thought she was a victim when she didn't get a job at her company, despite never actually applying. She was merely curious about working there and just told HR she wanted the position. Reply 5. I used to consider myself curious, but I've reached a point where I understand my interests and am secure with simple pleasures. Curiosity is important, but there is a responsibility to use it wisely. Pushing yourself into everything can create waste as you're forcing yourself into situations to consume more. This is more of an opinion living in a late-stage capitalist society that weaponizes curiosity to create more purchasing opportunities. You're right, in that a lack of curiosity cultivates ignorance. However, too much curiosity can create an ignorance of reality and one's relationship with their environment. Story 5. When you ask them something hypothetical, they don't understand it and get angry. What if you were to travel to this city by train? Would the trip be cheaper then? No, I used my car for this. I meant, what if you did? But I didn't. I used my car. Reply 1. That's what it's like to argue with my mom. Overly intelligent woman, a doctor, knows at least 3 languages, yet can't grasp what if or any other hypothetical questions. Reply 2. That's the thing about intelligence. People have different bandwidths. Your bandwidth is how much information you're able to process logically, come to the best solution, the solution that enhances your survivability in a given context. When your bandwidth becomes saddled with trauma or life stressors, it doesn't matter how educated you are, you cannot process information normally. It becomes limited. Some otherwise very intelligent people, once they become malinformed with trauma or misinformation, will make really unreasonable decisions. Maybe this is the case with your mother. Reply 3. I think my issue is that some of these people tend to also be incapable of understanding anything unless it happens to them personally. And even then, sometimes they don't understand it. Like being firmly against any kind of abortion, then they have to have an abortion, and they insist that it is different. They'll use other words or terms for aborting and go right back to being anti-abortion. Reply 4. I wonder how often that kind of interaction stems from an inability to visualize things in one's own head. I've run into several scenarios where my wife is incapable of answering hypotheticals, and it makes her feel physically upset. Most of the time, this seems to be because she has aphantasia, so her brain is actually not able to deal with said hypothetical. It's asking a person with a disability to do a task that the disability directly interferes with. Story 6. Inability to genuinely self-reflect. Reply 1. Part of that is social and living pressures that don't give people time to reflect. Like how people talk about shower thoughts or their minds running when they try to sleep. That's what happens when you don't spend time just thinking about random stuff and considering your own philosophies. Reply 2. There are definitely reflection deficits, but which of us doesn't have them? Climate change denial is a good example. There are loads of people willing to argue against the scientific consensus. This record here, my state had a cold winter, as if the climate scientists don't know all that, and are still 99+% attributing it to CO2 emissions. You get a similar thing with objections to evolution. They are incapable of seeing where their arguments come from. Reply 3. I have/had a very best friend. I realized after a year living with him that regardless of topic, he was always right in his eyes. He didn't care for my opinion or knowledge because he already knows he knows more than me, and therefore I'm wrong and basically a child who needs to accept his advice. Would you say I'm sensitive or he isn't being self-reflective? He is objectively very smart, but to me, he seems to not at all be self-reflective. But maybe I'm categorizing it wrong and I'm likely the stupid one. Reply 4. I want to like this, but it's not always accurate. I have an ex who's absolutely a narcissistic sociopath, and to this day, one of the most manipulative and intelligent humans I've ever met. She'll lie, cheat, steal, deny, counter-accuse, convince herself she's the victim, and 99% of the time will convince everyone else she's the victim too, even if it's something she started. She's quick-witted, surgical in her speech, and very convincing. She's constantly in lawsuits and in court suing people or companies or school systems for whatever reason. What's wild, though, is she's constantly in this state of intense anger and perceived injustice. Never once in the time that I had known her, even as a kid, did she ever once acknowledge or even have the ability to grasp that just maybe she's a tyrant, though. Lol, it's always someone or something else setting her off and their fault she reacted, X way, etc. Story 7. I believe there was a study that pointed to people below 85 IQ being incapable of comprehending false scenarios. They would ask them, what would you feel right now if you had skipped breakfast this morning? And get the response, no, I did eat breakfast this morning. And no matter how many times the question was reworded or explained, it was just beyond their comprehension. Well, intelligence is a spectrum, so the more difficulty a person has answering what-if scenarios, the less intelligent they likely are. Reply 1. I have seen many allusions to an apocryphal study that found that people with an IQ less than 90 don't understand hypothetical conditionals, but I have been unable to find a source for that. However, I have found a study that found lower cognitive ability is associated with the individual conflating a conditional with its converse. I read this to mean that the subjects would have trouble distinguishing, for example, between if you didn't have breakfast, then you would be hungry, and if you are hungry, then you didn't have breakfast. Or to give an example that would have more real-world ramifications, they may have trouble distinguishing between the statements, if the police find sufficient evidence he committed the crime, then he will be put on trial. And if he is on trial, then the police found sufficient evidence he committed the crime. That would have ramifications for how a jury assesses the burden of proof and reasonable doubt. Story 8. Acting like they know better than you on a topic they ask about. Specifically, this is coming from someone in the IT field. The number of people who, when I ask questions, will go, no, it can't be that, and refuse to even try. I have zero respect for them. Reply 1. Okay, so that sort of thing is really annoying. However, I get frustrated with being told this from the other perspective, plus, please help me with X problem with A, B, and C factors. Okay, use D solution plus. That won't work because of E and F factors. That I neglected to mention, maybe because I didn't realize they were relevant. Use D solution. OMG, why do you ask a question if you already know the solution plus, I don't know the solution, but it's clearly just not that. Reply 2. Oh my god, I have a coworker who is just like this. He doesn't know how to do any of the technical stuff since he's new. So I have to teach him. When I'm teaching him, he'd act like he knows better than me on what I'm teaching and would argue with me that I'm wrong despite him clearly being wrong. Needless to say, I stopped attempting to help him as much. Reply 3. I work in data, and the number of times my DB team just ignores all of the testing I blatantly say that I've done is incredibly frustrating. I will tell them that a data point is missing, and they will make me prove it in 999 different ways before they finally believe me. Every single time I have to repeat all of the steps it took me to get to my question, because they think I'm an idiot. I cooperate, of course, because I need them to do their job. But gosh, is it frustrating to be someone actually intelligent on the other side of this? Reply 4. In all fairness, there are IT people who think very analytically, understand the OSI model, and immediately know what the problem is not, and know chronologically and probabilistically what the minimal steps are to get the answer to the problem. Then there are people in IT who use what I call the shotgun approach and try everything seemingly at random. I have a guy that I work with, and when we have a problem with something, I have to tell him, nope, that is not the issue, abort investigating that, and redirect him. He calls me a wizard or genius, and I am neither of those. I don't think it will ever click for these people, as it requires curiosity about how the inner workings of systems function. Reply 5. Also in the IT field, I remember a scenario where a colleague and I were having an issue with an implementation. The salesman who was with us kept parroting, "Come on, this isn't rocket science, this isn't brain surgery," because I guess he thought we were making him look bad. All this as we're trying to concentrate on the problem at hand. I finally asked him, "Okay, genius, what do we do?" He replied, "I don't know, you guys are the experts." I took him outside and told him to STFU. You're just making the situation worse. Some people get through life with knowledge and careful thought, others get by on BS. Reply 6. Yeah, I worked for almost a decade at a large consumer electronics company that shall be unnamed, basically a household brand. I got the title of Senior Scientist/Fellow, which is basically the top 100 engineers out of 20,000. Pretty much knew everything about our products, and probably personally made a good chunk of the decisions. Unlike the 19,900 other engineers, I often have first-hand knowledge of the conversation with a CTO or COO that is the specific reason some product has an LCD instead of OLED or 12 GB RAM and not 16, etc. You wouldn't believe how often at parties after saying I work for blah, it's immediately followed by someone there giving a hot take they heard from a YouTuber or from a comment section of a tech tabloid like WCF Tech. Once in a while I have to pull out the trust that I know this. I was the primary contact representing 1,500 engineers working on that product. And then they would just fall back to a B-grade capitalism conspiracy theory. Definitely agree with you about people who try to act like they know more than the expert. But also people, when confronted with facts, just dig their heels in and pivot to a worse argument. Reply 7. That's a large part of the reason why I do my absolute best never to re-enter IT. The point that sealed it for me to never really give a crap ever again was when there was a flaw with a product regarding a specific feature, where the device would say the feature was enabled while it was actually disabled, and the manufacturer released an update that fixed that. I put a note in our system for them to be updated and moved on, specifically attaching the document from the manufacturer stating that this was an issue and how to update it. I then sent another email outlining everything, with the PDF from the manufacturer attached to everybody who even might handle these, so there wouldn't be any alarm when it said the feature was enabled on them. Just to be completely clear about it, I also printed out the PDF and put it on top of the paperwork that went with everything when it got moved on. 2 hours later, I was in a conference room with my coworker and our boss, with my coworker screaming at me about enabling the feature on these devices, how they're now unusable, and how I just apparently didn't give a crap about it because I moved them on from me. He completely ignored the email I would have sent 2 hours prior to that, the notes in our system about that batch of devices, and the packet of paperwork that was included with the devices. In order to de-escalate, I had to issue an ultimatum to my boss that the screaming would stop or I quit on the spot, which finally made my boss intervene. I was fuming, and my boss started to tell my coworker about the email I sent and the notes I put in the system. I figured maybe this was the end of it, but his response was that I was making things up to cover myself. Story 9. Hostile towards displays of intelligence. Their reaction to confusion is anger. Reply 1. One of my friends in school was really smart and would always take the time to help the others in our friend group with tests, etc. One time she tried to explain something to that one girl. She couldn't understand it, so she resorted to being sarcastic towards my friend. That's when we knew she was a complete idiot. Reply 2. Similarly, people who are defensive over the idea that a lack of intelligence could even be insinuated. I'm a blackjack dealer. The other day, my coworker's table got very loud and rowdy. Turns out it was because a player plopped down a bet of 6 $5 chips out while asking, "How much is this?" And my coworker broke it down to confirm herself and said, $30 or 6 red chips. And he started yelling at her and insulting her appearance because he took it as an insinuation that he can't count to 6. Bitch? Brother? Literally, as table game staff, we have to break the chips down in very specific ways because it can be hard to read as a stack. I even pick up the chips to count them from the side sometimes. So the other players at the table started angrily clowning him for being a dumb asshole. Story 10. Their view of life is largely defined by winning and losing. Nothing in between. Reply 1. I've noticed these people also dwell on assessing blame and doling out punishment rather than actually fixing the problem and preventing it from happening again. Reply 2. The morality mindset. If you believe morality, particularly the one you think is divinely inspired, is innate, then anyone who goes against that is not only immoral, but is going against the established social order and therefore must be punished for being without morals. A pauper is poor, not because they were born into poverty and uneducated. The pauper is poor because they are inherently immoral. The wealthy landowner is at peak morality because of how wealthy and educated he is. Therefore, he deserves to not only be at the top of the social order, but also guide those beneath him. This is the root of supply-side Jesus and how the U.S. has found itself in the place that it is now. Far too many people have been convinced that the wealthy are smarter and morally superior to everyone else. Reply 3. This is why I dislike debating in most cases. For me, debating should be an exchanging of viewpoints and embellishment of information that you know while learning information you didn't. You should come out of a debate having obtained new information, and while you don't disagree, you have informed them of your position with facts to back it. To most people, debating is winning and losing, which in most cases is just someone screaming over someone else and not actually talking. Reply 4. This is more likely to be a trauma-related thing, I think. I was raised to view everyone and everything as a competition, one for attention, affection, intelligence, and success. And I was always pulled to the sidelines to say how my parents were betting a lot on me and how I needed to be better to win the game. Literally direct quotes from them BDTW. I know that not everything is a competition, but a lot of life has been defined by this winner or loser mentality for many people I know, not just me. Story 11. They think magnets don't work when they get wet. Reply 1. Remarkably, Trump's idiotic tirade about magnets got very little press coverage. The news media dropped the ball on this. Trump is stupid. I don't mean that I disagree with him. I don't mean that I have different values than he does. I don't mean that I have contempt for him. I mean that he is of below-average intelligence. It's apparent when he speaks, over and over. His political followers mistake wealth for competence. And our spineless news media has completely dropped the ball on Trump's failure to understand basic facts and his bizarre conclusions, almost without exception. Reply 2. That's not a sign of stupidity on its own, but if the same person also think that you can have a good instinct for science, or that having an uncle at MIT makes you smart, or think you can cure diseases by injecting disinfectant, or that windmills cause cancer, or that it's fine to stare at an eclipse, or that nobody knew healthcare was complicated before him, or that Vladimir Putin is a friend of the USA, or that you can mine coal and clean it to get clean energy, and much more. Well taken together, you can rightfully assume the person is not the sharpest tool in the drawer. Story 12. They are absolutely convinced that they are intelligent. All intelligent people know that they know next to nothing, and that the amount of knowledge they don't have vastly oversize the knowledge they possess. Show me a person with absolute conviction, and I'll show you a person who's not flexible in his mind. Reply 1. I would argue, though, that if you have, say, a 150 IQ, while you will be smart enough to know that you know almost nothing in the grand scheme of things, it is also true that you can be objectively sure you are more intelligent than 99.9% of people. Like all adjectives, intelligent is relative, and the only thing we are realistically comparing it with is other humans. I think it would be more accurate if you said, they're absolutely convinced that they're right, regardless of new information contradicting them. Because I think plenty of people can be sure they're very intelligent relative to the average person. Yet also be humble and know that the sum total of their knowledge isn't even a drop in the ocean of all there is to know, and that they will often be wrong about things. Basically narcissists. Most narcissists are dumb. At least they might be high in functional intelligence, like, say, math, but are dumb in the context of what we're describing here. Story 13. Talking over you and the inability to debate reasonably. Reply 1. I was recently in the car with my dad, and he was listening to some radio show where the guest caller did exactly this. It was so irritating that he changed the channel. The host made a claim and then opened the floor for debate. The caller would not let the host finish a single sentence. He was not only cutting the host off, but also using a lot of poor argument practices like whataboutism, red herrings, and the like. He was all over the place. The host tried to remain calm and present his evidence, but he never got the chance. Pretty sure the caller thinks he won that debate. Story 14. Unintelligent people often overestimate their own intelligence, misread situations, and credit their misreading to being smarter than everyone else. Here's an example. The dude in the giant truck who pulls onto the shoulder of the traffic-jammed highway and drives past all the other idling cars to an exit to get there sooner. That guy genuinely believes that he figured out something that no one else did. He thinks he figured out how to avoid a traffic jam because he's smarter than all the other people waiting in traffic to get to that exit. He thinks everyone would do that if they were just smart enough to have thought of it. He's not smart enough to realize that the rest of the people are just trying not to be assholes and probably already thought about driving on the shoulder, but decided against it because it's an asshole thing to do. Story 15. Smart people don't make unnecessary assumptions. Conversely, stupid people often go the extra mile. Reply. 1. I wonder if the root of this is stupid people give themselves too much credence. This guy looks X to me, therefore they are, or any other facet of life. Like assumption is always one extrapolation from incomplete data. It's based on your own possibly flawed view on things. Taking a glance and saying it's this is always giving yourself the leeway to make judgment. It's not always thinking I know everything, but it's dipping a toe in it, and it can go too far. I bet that's a feedback loop of survival that's ingrained in all of us. Reply 2. It's easier to keep track of things in absolute terms when you fill in the missing information with assumptions, whether right or wrong. Gaps in information blow out the number of possibilities, and many find it hard to reason about things after just a few permutations. Unfortunately, many people will hold on to their false assumptions even when presented with the right information because reconstructing their beliefs to incorporate the new information and discard some potentially long-held or dear beliefs is far too daunting. Conversely, an intelligent individual may use assumptions as a useful heuristic for thinking about the world, but they understand the volatility of this information, are actively skeptical about them, and will reconstruct their entire world model if they have to when provided compelling enough evidence. Story 16. Not necessarily unintelligent, but not a good sign. No passion for learning and being curious. If I had to choose between two applicants, one who is undoubtedly a brilliant mind but only wants to be better than everyone, and one who loves to learn and shows an interest in others' work, I'd take the latter every time.
Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story to these that you want to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.